Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Another Bath for Europe, our monthly Pulse of Europe or Euro Cafe, which we have the first Sunday of every month. The last couple of months we've started inviting some speakers from the local area just to talk about various topics that are more relevant directly to Bath and North East Somerset. So this month even, we are very pleased to welcome Mark Huband, who was the Labour candidate in North East Somerset in the last two general elections. Is that right, Mark?
No, the last one, I was in Cotswolds in 2000.
Oh, right, okay, right. But yes, so I'm sure Mark will introduce himself a bit more fully and sort of explain his background. But one of the projects that he is becoming involved in here in the west of England is the West England Bylines, which is an independent online newspaper which is just launching, is due to be launched at the beginning of August. So this was started off by the Yorkshire group. So there's a Yorkshire Bylines, and other sort of examples of it are starting up around the country. And the West England one, like I say, is due to be launched next month. And Mark is going to be quite involved with that. I know that they're looking for volunteers. So if you do have any experience in writing or anything like that and want to get involved, we can always put you in touch with that team, and I'm sure Mark would be very pleased to hear from you as well. So Mark, I'm going to pass over to you, and if everyone would stay muted just so that we can hear Mark speaking, and then afterwards we'll open it up to a discussion and some questions and conversation a little bit afterwards. Okay, Mark, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. It's very nice to be here, and to thanks for inviting me along to chat. So a couple of things. I'll perhaps talk about the West England Bylines, during the sort of Q&A element. But I'm going to be editing that, and I'm editing it at the moment and gathering articles and so on. But we can perhaps chat about that later on. But I was chatting away with your colleagues in Bath for Europe with regard to a particular focus of a discussion. What will it take to keep Britain European? So I've put down a few thoughts on this issue, and so perhaps for sort of 10 minutes or so I'll chat about that, and we can perhaps go on and discuss the issues raised and the things that I feel are the challenge that we now face, as we seek to go to the next stage of our campaign to both obviously keep Britain European, but also to ensure that we rejoin the EU at a certain point. So just to start with, I would say that there are moments still 4 years after the two when I find myself having to retrace my steps as I try to answer the question, why did we lose then, and why have we lost at each stage since the referendum? I don't want to dwell upon the issue of electoral arithmetic or party political pacts and the other strategies which could perhaps have given us the numbers we needed, because I think that that's another discussion. But I do feel even so that what lies behind their success and our failure remains rooted in the issues which, when addressed, I think, addressing the question now of what will it take to keep Britain European? As is often the case, perhaps one begins to answer a question by first considering other questions. So just very briefly, part of the answer, or at least part of the response to this question, must involve asking ourselves, first, what is it to be European? And secondly, was Britain as a country ever really European in the ways that we as pro-Europeans see ourselves as being? I think these questions are important in our strategy for the coming months and years, a strategy which I personally see as preparing the ground for the UK to rejoin the EU in the not too distant future. We have to be extremely clear about three things in particular. First, what does being European actually mean? Second, what is it to be British and European? And third, to what extent does being European in essence imply being a member of the European Union or having a close association with the EU? These questions lead in one direction, that is towards the seemingly eternal issue of identity. If we think back to the referendum campaign and to the subsequent campaign to hold a second referendum, many of us found ourselves in supporters who seemed immune to our pretty much irrefutable argument that we would all be poorer outside the EU. But this argument, the credibility of which is now becoming stronger by the day, held little water for those millions of committed leavers. Why so? Because identity had somehow become more significant than common sense. I'm not one, obviously, for adopting the tactics of the Leave campaign. They broke the law, they cheated, and thereby secured their strategic success. It was not clearly a success of which any civilized person can be proud. But for us, and remember, we are the majority, as the December 2019 general election showed, when pro-European parties secured 2 million more votes than the populists. The challenge today, and for the coming months and years as we take our campaign to the next stage, is to look very hard at the identity the Leave campaign successfully had. Of course, as the combined effects of the coronavirus pandemic and a possible or probable no-deal Brexit hit people across the country in the coming months, many of those leavers who in 2016 voted as their identities seemed to be telling them will face a rude awakening. And as the harsh reality replaces the gilded deceit the Leave campaign promised the country, the task we will face will be multifold. So, in such a deteriorating climate European, inevitably, because it will be fact, there will be a strong temptation to emphasise the gulf between the UK government's catastrophic mismanagement of the pandemic and that experienced in many EU countries, with Greece and Germany the standouts. However, as it is the case that we in the UK can plainly see how badly this government has handled the crisis, there's probably only limited need for us to actually highlight it. Instead, what we should do is highlight those areas, which so far have in fact been too few, in which EU-wide cooperation has strengthened the capacity of EU countries to grapple with the crisis, and which, in so doing, has emphasised the ethical underpinning of the European Union. As, for example, the well-resourced ECB takes further steps to assist Eurozone states, the mid- and long-term benefits of EU membership will be further emphasised, and we should be highlighting this within the UK as an example of the strength derived from being. However, even emphasis of these issues, which since the 31st of January of this year do have something of a shutting the barn door after the horse has bolted feel about them as far as the UK is concerned, is unlikely to address the issue of identity to which millions of Leave voters remain attached. In light of which, the challenge for us as we seek to keep Britain European begins with the pressing need to frame what are essentially the practical steps the EU has taken within the context of identity and the ethical principles by which that identity is underpinned. So it seems to me that our current tasks when seeking to answer the question of what it will take to keep Britain European are the following. First, to focus on rights, democracy, equality of opportunity, and action on the environment as being issues which, in a world in which right-wing populism remains immensely potent, even if it may be passing its peak, are today only really being both championed and defended by the EU. Second, to demonstrate why it is that the British identity is essentially European, and that it is ultimately best defended in cooperation with the like-minded states with which we share thousands of years of history, cultural interaction, and political evolution. And third, to emphasise that EU membership is not the sole criteria by which our Europeanness is defined, but that membership is the inevitable, reasonable, and positive result of it. The fact, and I remain convinced of this, that the majority of the peoples of the UK share these ideals with the EU, means that it follows that our natural home is within the European Union. Part of the tragedy of what we are now going through is that only by actually experiencing Brexit's consequences for lives and livelihoods will leavers perhaps begin to change their worldview. The £170 billion economic cost of Brexit since 2016 being likely by the end of 2020 to exceed the £200 billion of UK contributions to the EEC and the EU since 1973 may well become part of the changing equation. The process of realisation will undoubtedly be painful, and of course the government will blame COVID-19 for issues that are in fact the result of Brexit. But it is necessary for the so-called Eurosceptics to actually experience the impotence of the UK on the world stage as a country on its own. Only as part of a bloc can the UK actually champion effectively and with results the ideals in which the majority of its citizens really believe. This realization will take time, but I do feel that it will happen. But there's also a second step we should take as we endeavour to keep Britain European. We, as the progressive majority, should lead the process of self-examination of the increasingly fractured UK, of the increasingly polarised peoples of the UK, and of the evolving self-image of the UK, particularly with regard to how it is viewed globally. Whether it is Theresa May talking of re-establishing global Britain's ties with so-called old friends in the Commonwealth, or Liam Fox blithely predicting easy trade deals around the world on the basis of global admiration and fondness for Great Britain, or Johnson peddling his "they need us more than we need them" mantra, the hollowness of successive advocates of the reshaped UK relationship with the rest of the world is now evident. The UK, in my view, is very few of the things those who have led opinion over the past 4 years have sought to portray it as being. And we, as progressive patriots and as civilized internationalists, but above all as truth tellers, need to develop a clear narrative which is both positive and honest as regards what our country is, what it could be if the divisions of the past 4 years were healed and civility and honesty again became core features of political discourse, and how it is that the championing of rights, democracy, equality can only bring results if we're part of something larger than ourselves alone. But we need to do this without sounding or being negative about our country. And we start by working out very clearly in our own minds, not what it is that will keep Britain European, but what it really is that defines what it is to be European, both individually and nationally. And I feel we have some way to go before our detractors really can see why it is we define ourselves in this way and what we gain from doing so. But only by being very clear in our own minds as to what constitutes our identities as Europeans can we be clear to our detractors as to why it is that they too should regard themselves as being as European as they are British. And I feel that it's on this basis that the Britain that always has been European can be made to remain so. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mark. That was really interesting to listen to. I think you're right that we definitely have to obviously continue campaigning to highlight the positives of being European. But now as Brexit has happened, I think there is a certain amount of waiting to see what the consequences are, and hope, as you said, that there's enough rope in that. But would anyone like to ask a question or start a conversation, basically? Nobody? Klaus, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I have one question. Thank you very much for this. It's quite, I would say, eye and ear opener. However, you were talking quite a lot about identity. One thing which really kind of came where I said there is some valid or some points is where the Brexiters said, we want to have control. And I think there is this limit or the kind of a concern of people with saying, someone is taking my decision process away from me. So I want to have my control. And this might be run parallel with where is my identity, because I belong to somewhere, to something, which might be just saying, okay, I'm a proud British citizen. On the other side is, I want to do things which are good for me, and I don't know how far I can go because, and this was very much promoted by the Bojos, like, we want to have that back. This is our drive. This is what we want.
Yes.
How do you see that?
Yes, I think this is a really fascinating point. Thank you very much for raising it. And there are many things there, you see, because I think that you're right about everything, particularly about different things going on in parallel. Because I think that the identity issue and the issue of control are seen. They're very mixed up. They're very combined in people's minds. That the extent to which people in this country see their identity in the form of institutions, particularly Parliament, is something that was obviously raised quite a lot during the referendum campaign. But I think that what we've seen subsequently, is that Parliament has been very strongly derided at certain points over the past several years. And so while on the one hand, there's been a sense of wanting to celebrate the idea of Parliament as being a part of our identity, on the other hand, Parliament has been attacked by most Brexiters at certain points. And so there's such a deep sense of confusion, I think, about what the identity actually is. Now, I think that the confusion and the uncertainty have been part of the pro-Brexit campaign, part of the Leave campaign, exploiting confusion, exploiting uncertainty. And I'll give you an example. The whole point about taking back control, at no point during that use, and I don't want to go back in too much over old ground. I do want to be forward-looking in this discussion, but the whole point about taking back control never led to serious discussion about what degree of control individuals would actually have on control coming back to Parliament. And the point is that, what we see now, for example, is we see obviously this group of essentially three people running the country: Cummings, Johnson and Gove. Now, never has control been so restricted, never to such a small group of people. We're in a situation now where democratic accountability, the democratic accountability of government, is really under threat. Not least because, of course, we've got media that would act as something of a brake on on the actions of government, or at least would question government, and that would be part of the process of accountability. But now we have media that aren't favoured by simply not being invited to ask questions at press conferences, or never being able to get ministers to come onto their programs, particularly in terms of the television. And I think that these different aspects of what taking back control really means are being exposed. I think that the fallacy of there being greater control in the hands of people in this country is something that has been shown to be a very, very hollow, because, as I say, Parliament is okay. It's in the hands now of a Conservative Party with an 80-seat majority, but in terms of actual accountability, I wonder, because essentially the one thing that one hears all the time from Conservative backbenchers is that they're completely ignored, and one's increasingly hearing it even from members of the cabinet. And I think that all these different things really do add up to a picture that, just to come back to your point, of control really not having been taken back, except by they are a much smaller group than they ever were, and they're less accountable than they have ever been. At the same time, people who voted to leave the European Union, thinking in terms of the institutions that are part of their identity remaining as distant from them, frankly, as they, in fact, more distant now than they ever were, and the issue then of identity being one that I think is continuing to be confusing. And I feel that that's where we as progressives can step in. I think that we can say, look, okay, let's talk about our identity. Let's not shy away from it, just as we should never shy away from the issue of immigration. And I think that as a Labour person, I think that Labour should have been more focused on the immigration issue during the referendum. But that's, as it were, perhaps another issue. But I think that now we're in a situation where identity is an area that we must, as progressives, we must seize the initiative. We must say, okay, well, what is our identity? It's not parliamentary democracy, because essentially you've got massive decision making centralized in the Cabinet Office, and so therefore it can't be seen as parliamentary democracy that we've sort of put onto a new pedestal as a result of leaving the European Union. It can't be the case that we feel that we're stronger in the world because we've got a terrible record with regard to management of this crisis, and as a result, even a government that has got huge control over all the resources, it doesn't have to defer to any institutions, it doesn't have to defer to anybody. It's had an opportunity to demonstrate what taking back control really means, and the result has been absolute catastrophe. With regard to the highest death toll in Europe, the second or perhaps third highest toll in the world. I think that per capita, the second highest toll in the world, and so on. It's had an opportunity to show what taking back control really means, and it's been a failure. And I think that there we can step in and should step in on the issue of, okay, what is it to be British? What is it to be European? What is it to be a non-British person who's living in the UK, which I think perhaps you are, and so on. And I think that all these different things are the areas in which we start to build up the British identity, or the British identity within the context of Europe. So I think that there is a great opportunity for us to take things to the next stage along those lines.
Great, thank you, Mark. We've had a question in the chat. If anyone just wants to write a question in the chat, please feel free. There's a button at the bottom. Sorry, Andrew, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hello. Yes, firstly, thank you for that. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes.
Oh, yeah. Firstly, thank you for that talk, which I thought was superb. It was a wonderful analysis. One thing I want to point out is that the EU wasn't a big issue until not long before the referendum.
Yes.
So these identities of Leave and Remain are actually new inventions. Mm-hmm. They're certainly pretty solid now, but they are nonetheless new. Okay, and it's essential we kind of bear that in mind, because mm-hmm. things that come can go as well. Mm-hmm. The proportion of people who are concerned about this issue is something like 10-15%, I think, up until the referendum. Now, I would agree with your sort of general analysis about identity and so on. However, the bit that you haven't put into it is how we would communicate. How would we put into the public domain in a persuasive way ideas which then circulate? And in a way, this is actually a simpler process than your analysis might suggest, because it doesn't involve deep ideas of identity. It involves fairly simple slogans and words which then pass into everyday discourse, which pass for understanding. That's true of Remainers as well as Leavers, actually, because I'm sure lots of people who support, the EU don't really have much of a deep understanding of it. Mm-hmm. So we mustn't delude ourselves by thinking we're necessarily the rational ones, but we have circulating in our minds a different set of words and ideas. Mm-hmm. Now the question is, how can we put these pro-European ideas into the public mind? We don't have the channel. The government has enormous power, and the right-wing press has extraordinary power. The BBC has, and has basically served as a state broadcaster. The only channel I can see that has a significant influence is the Labour Party. Mm-hmm. It's the official opposition. It has publicity. Now, at present, it's keeping pretty quiet on Europe, probably sensibly. But at some point, it needs to have a European policy which argues for European alignment. Mm-hmm. And then it needs to articulate the reasons for this in a way which are memorable and effective. You mentioned about the we can't copy the Leave campaign because essentially they're immoral, but what we can copy is some of their methods.
Mm-hmm.
And their methods are actually simple communication strategies.
Thanks very much. Yes, I mean, I agree with you, and I'm looking forward to the Labour Party kind of coming into its own on this. I think that at the moment, and I don't know this from any kind of internal sort of insight, but clearly what Keir Starmer has said is, let's wait and see. Johnson has said he can get a great deal. Let's wait and see. And the point about that strategy is, I think it's twofold. One is that Labour's got a lot of things to sort out, internally, and he wants to get those sorted out. Clearly, the issue, the pandemic has been a vital part of Keir Starmer's focus, quite rightly, over the last several months, and so on. But I think there's a third point, and thank you for raising it. That the third point is that clearly, the country is rather entrenched, very entrenched, with regard to the issue of Europe. It's obviously been, it's wounded everybody. I mean, on both sides, frankly, in the sense that, I think that for lots of different reasons. But I feel that what we don't want to do at this stage is to make it appear that that we're having the same discussions as we've been having for the last 4 years. I think that somehow things have got to move on to the next stage. And that's why I feel that to address your point of how does one get things out there into the public domain is immensely important, and I'll come on in a second into the bylines publications that I'm involved with. But more important than that is, what is the message that we want to get out there into the public domain? And I think that there's a kind of almost a sort of one element of that is that almost the medium is the message to some extent. The actual narrative that we need to be presenting is going to be as effective at certain stages, as what we are saying, because of the fact that Brexit is only as credible as the people who are arguing for it, and as Johnson's personal credibility diminishes, the credibility of Brexit itself, I think, diminishes. So what do we do in response to that? Well, what we, I think, have to do is first of all be very clear, as I said in my short presentation earlier on, that we have to be very clear about what it is to be European. We have to be very clear in our own minds as to the issue of identity, because I think that will show us to be people who know what they are, who know what we stand for, know why it is that we feel part of something bigger than just England. And let's face it, this is about England, this whole issue. And I think that the need for us to convey a sense of confidence about our own identities is something that will have a great potency as confidence in the people who are the symbols of Brexit diminishes. And I think that confidence has already diminished. I mean, one's already seen Johnson's own personal credibility crash, not because of Brexit, but because of the pandemic. But I think that as a personality, as an individual, he's going to find it very, very difficult to recapture that credibility, because he's now got the next big challenge just down the road. And at the end of the year, if indeed there's been no deal, and we do suffer the financial and economic consequences that we predict will be the result of a no-deal Brexit, then he's going to have to justify that to people. And I think that we have to come across as being the alternative, not just in terms of having had the right arguments, but also as being people who say, look, the reason we have these arguments is because we're just as patriotic as anybody else. We're just as proud of our country as anybody else. We just want to make it a better place. And that's why we believe in being part of Europe. And I think that there will be, it will be a hard one for our detractors to hit back on. But what we don't want to be doing in the meantime is allowing them to say, oh, you're just fighting an old battle. We're saying, no, we're not. This is today's battle and tomorrow's battle. And I think that, so we choose our words carefully. We're clear about what we stand for. And just to come on to the point that you mentioned about specifically, how do we get our message out there? I mean, I don't want to over egg it, but the bylines publications, for example, I think are going to become an important part of that. There are now 3. There's Yorkshire bylines, there's Northeast bylines, which was launched yesterday or Friday, and West England bylines, which is the one I'm editing, which will launch at the beginning of August. West Country bylines is on the way. There's another which will be essentially Sussex and Kent, which hasn't given itself a name yet. So, there will be these fora, and, yes, they will be part of the media picture. But they will provide platforms, and they will unite people as well, because they will be they're non-party, but they're united by a sense of what is progressive, and what do we want to see. And yeah, they're pro-Europe, but none of them are going to have the European flag on them. They're just going to be pro-Europe. So our message will be getting across, our pro-Europe message will be getting across, not as flag flying, but as, look, we're reasonable people, and we just, we want to make our country a better place, and we want to be where it's at when it comes to being able to be a part of, for example, as was in I think it's the Observer, is it today, or the Guardian yesterday, plans to be part of a new, vaccine-focused, initiative. The UK government is now considering being part of that. In other words, the need to be part of something bigger than just us, is already becoming evident. And I think all these different things will come together, but we've got to choose our words carefully and be very confident about our own identities. And if we don't feel confident about them at this stage, then we need to be, we need to work out, well, okay, what is it about us? What is, the self-examination process, I think, is a very important one. And I just finally, so I'm going on too much, but just one point, that I was the spokesperson for Gloucestershire for Europe during the People's Vote campaign. And so we did a lot of street stalls, and we had a lot of, obviously lots of discussion, with people in different parts of the county. And I did feel that there was obviously huge amounts of enthusiasm for our campaign. But one of the things that I do feel came across to me in the conversations I had with people, with some, not all, but with quite a lot of the people with whom I was involved in that campaign, was that they were not good at actually telling people why it was that the EU was where they wanted to be. And it was a shame. But now the thing is, what was the reason for that? Partly because we'd sort of taken it for granted for a long time. Partly because the process, that the referendum process and the post-referendum period, were actually the periods during which a lot of people in the UK started to familiarize themselves with what Europe was all about. And that was a problem, because essentially we should have been doing that 20 years ago. We weren't. Now, let's not blame ourselves, but I think it's a very strong lesson, a very important lesson, that we still need to make sure why being in part of Europe is what we want, or certainly a sense of Europeanness. And I think that if we strengthen the sense of Europeanness, and then demystify and so on the European Union, but also in terms of strategy, have a very clear idea about what it is that we need to do in order, as you've said, to contend with the really low methods that we had to contend with during the referendum campaign. Of course, we have to be able to get our voice there. We have to be able to preempt any kind of subterfuge and the kind of the data mining and all the other different things. We have to make sure that we've got an idea about what we're really dealing with. But crucially, I think we need to know why we believe what we believe, and then we need to be very clear about how we want to get that message across. And so I think these are very important things. And I do feel that we're still at that stage where we need to clarify precisely what being European is all about, and how it marries up with being British.
Sorry, I've just had there's a question in the chat that sort of links to this. So what would British identity mean given the latest polling in favour of Scottish independence? And do you think that if Scotland became independent, that would have an impact on English identity? Because obviously English identity is one of the things that you highlighted, particularly with regards to how they view Europe. Yeah,
no, I do. I think that, if one then thinks back to the Scottish referendum, independence referendum, that so much of that was bound up in terms of the Better Together campaign, which I was a part of. I felt that, you know, I wanted the UK to remain united. I mean, I want greater devolution, and not just between the sort of four nations, but between different regions of certainly of England as well, obviously. I think that the you know, part of the tragedy of Brexit is the fact that it is preempting, or, you know, it is creating the possibility of the breakup of the UK. Now, I mean, there are different. It's not, you know, it's not all the same situation. I mean, Northern Ireland, I'm in favour of the reunification of Ireland. So I don't I don't see that issue in the same way that I would see the issue of Scotland becoming independent. I feel that the likelihood of Scotland becoming independent has clearly, you know, increased since as a result of Brexit, and there are a number of reasons for that. You know, one is that, you know, there was that appalling, well, no, not appalling, shocking poll among, you know, 66% of Conservative voters said that they would, you know, be prepared to see Scotland become independent if you know, if they could get their Brexit. And for me, that was a treacherous sentiment, frankly. You know, I'm a citizen of the United Kingdom. It says it on my passport. I'm not a citizen of England. And I think that for there to be people in this country who are prepared to essentially dismember it in pursuit of their political agenda is something that I find deeply offensive. Part of our, as progressives, our platform, because we need to be able, I think, we do need to talk the language of patriotism. We shouldn't shy away from it. I mean, in the Labour Party, there's always been, you know, quite a lot of, you know, there are people who hate the word patriotism, but actually, you know, you're involved in politics because you believe in the, you know, in the bit of land upon which you are playing those politics, and that's the UK. And so there's nothing wrong with thinking in sort of patriotic terms. Patriotism for me is, you know, is democracy, it is rights, it is equality, it is all the things that the Labour Party stands for. That's what, shy away from that. And I think with regard to the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom, that it is under threat as a result of Brexit, because, of course, the Scottish referendum, independence referendum, was partly fought by the Better Together campaign on the basis that, you know, a strong UK in Europe. You know, Cameron was all about that, and others were all about that as well. And quite rightly, you know, a lot of people in Scotland feel that that was a complete trick. I mean, even though obviously Cameron sort of half-heartedly fought in favour of, you know, staying in the EU, so he can't be criticised for that, you know, too much. But I think that there is you know, we are in danger now of Scotland simply saying, well, look, you know, our interests don't lie in this reactionary country that's lost its way entirely. I mean, England has lost its way entirely, as far as I can see, and as I'm concerned. And I think that you know, that we are faced with the possibility, and in fact, probability at some point over the next 5-10 years, you know, of a Scottish referendum leading to independence from Scotland. I mean, the thing that at the moment, the thing that will stop it is the fact of the government simply refusing to allow a referendum to be held. But, you know, that won't end the sentiment.
John Leach, you had your hand up a minute ago.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to something that Mark was talking about earlier on, which was identity and you know, what taking back control means. Because when Mark was talking about what that meant, it was things like greater concentration of power in a small number of hands, it was lack of scrutiny, it was a whole variety of things which, to my mind, were all about undermining democracy, a breaking of the democratic traditions and foundations that we have taken for granted. You know, a lot of people just presumed, you know, we were a democratic country and we did democracy well, and all of a sudden we're not doing democracy very well at all. In fact, we're doing it very badly. And I see with the plans of the Tory party to curtail scrutiny, especially curtail scrutiny of the courts, I almost see Brexit not as an end in itself, but a means towards another end. It's a means towards that greater undermining okay. So yes, we had to come out from the EU because being in the EU means being fundamentally more democratic than than England is becoming. And if we're talking about identity and what is the core of that identity that we now need to try to understand, I'd almost suggest it's being democratic. That we are saying our identity is we are fundamentally democratic. We believe in the processes and the infrastructures of democracy, and we believe it works for the whole of the electorate, not just a tiny proportion of it. So therefore we believe in a better media that's not controlled purely by an extremely wealthy, and a whole variety of other things. So I don't know how this will go down, but I almost see, as I say, Brexit as a means to something larger, and therefore when we're talking about identity, we need to focus on that larger thing, which is democracy as a whole, rather than Brexit as a component.
John, I absolutely agree with you, and I hope that, I hope that my initial remarks when I opened at the beginning, that where I made that point, I hope they came across clearly enough. That several things. I do feel that the majority of people in this country are in fact believers in those same principles that are the core principles that underpin what the EU is all about. And the fact that so many people voted against remaining in the European Union, or obviously voted to leave the European Union, was part of the shock lay for me was in the fact that it seemed to me that that they had been told, or no, not told, but people had been convinced that in fact those principles of democracy and so on were being undermined by EU membership, when in fact throughout the last 25 years in particular, I've felt more than one, in fact, on numerous occasions, that, well, at least we've got the EU to protect us against the excesses of our own political system. And, it's been such an important part of what it is that, has built up in terms of the kind of broader political landscape of being a British person in the European Union, that it's been a relief to think that there's, obviously there are institutions that are not EU institutions like the Court of Human Rights and so on, but others where I feel that the pursuit of a legalistic approach to things, of a rules-based approach to things, of a rights-based approach to things, essentially, it is within the EU that we have seen these things most assertive, whereas and not subject to manipulation and political this and political that, which is what is the case here. So so I've that's one point I would make, but I feel this is why what we're dealing with now as progressive people wanting to take things to the next stage, we're dealing with, I think, a situation in which our country who criticize us, or the detractors, the people who voted to leave and so on, how do you tell them you've been tricked without making them feel stupid? That's the point. Because these people are not stupid. They want to make their lives better, and they thought that was how they were going to be able to do it. Now the point is that with regard specifically to democratic control, this is a very potent for us, because I think that we can stress time and again, look, you thought that this government that is Brexit government going to be EU control, but never has it been the case that democratic accountability has been so restricted. As I said earlier, you've got the red wall seats which have become conservative. Those MPs, they are complaining a lot about the fact that they never get consulted. It's a very, very important issue, because it will go to the heart, I think, of something that is very deep among people who voted to leave the EU, that they did have high expectations, and they do have high expectations. They do want to see their lives get better. This is a deeply unhappy country, and that's why so many people voted to leave the EU. Let's accept that. It's not a happy place. So we need to be able to draw those people into supporting progressive not even to talk about rejoining yet. It's far too early. But to talk about progressive politics, it doesn't have to be like this. We we can make things better for ourselves as a country. Let's think about it in this term, these terms, and those terms, and so on, and focus it on specific issues. And I think the crucial one at the moment, partly because Johnson and Cummings and Gove, have really, they've been so assertive in terms of exercising power, not leaking the head of the civil service, appointing a yes man who was running the Scottish Whisky Association to be in charge of our national security. I mean, these are laughable tragedies, and I think that there's a lot there which we must take advantage of. And I think that we can be, as it were, answering the questions that the referendum period threw up, but with a forward-looking approach. And I think that's what we have to do, so that that the questions that you raise, or the issues that you raise, are addressed, and we start to drip feed, or even more, into people's minds that what you were told you were going to get has not happened. And one of the reasons that it has not happened is because, frankly, this is a personal view, they never had the intention but themselves in the first place. I mean, that was always the case, and so there's a lot. I think there's a lot there that which we must and can, as it were, take advantage of when we're building up our message.
Yeah, I mean, two things in response to that. I mean, one of them is that I agree with you. One of my reasons for voting to remain was I thought that we would be protected by the EU from some of the worst excesses of the British government and the British political constitution. The vulnerability of the EU was the fact that it wasn't perfectly democratic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think there's a country in the world that does, if it took a democratic audit, would score 100%. The EU probably did better than the UK did, but it certainly wasn't perfect. So it was easy to have people who wanted to leave the EU point to some of the democratic failings of the EU, which I think was a problem we didn't respond to very well at all, and we need to do better. The other thing is that it's one thing to understand it in terms of democracy and the foundations and the way the constitution works and the practices that we're seeing, but to go back to, I think, Andrew's point, I mean, you can't communicate it today and then expect them to join to our view, because clearly the 2016 referendum showed that if you try to appeal to people's hearts through their heads by giving them information about the economic impact, or this piece of rational explanation or that piece of rational explanation, you're appealing to their heads, and people often vote with their hearts. Yeah. Well, I think that ties in with this identity idea. And any discussion that we had about economic impact, identity carried more weight. The heart, the irrationality, if that's not an unkind way to put it, carried more weight than the rational, logical explanations of numbers and charts and so forth. To come back to Andrew, it's one thing to understand it in a rational sense, it's something else to communicate it. And I think we do have to learn from the Leave campaign, simple 3-word messages. Don't worry about the rational structure behind it so much. Just convey the message that let people to say, yes, that talks to me.
A 3-word message is perfectly fine, as long as it's true. And I think that take back control was a lie on every front, in the sense that control had never been lost, and it left open the question of who precisely is going to have control. And so I think that it was a false. It was a very dubious, at best, a very dubious 3-line mantra. And so, but I agree with you. I think simple message, but we need to work out what the message is. Just to come back, and Andrew also mentioned this issue, or raised this issue. I'm in the Labour Party. I was the candidate in North East Somerset. Prior to that, in 2017, I was the candidate in the Cotswolds. I think that we do have certain milestones coming up, and I do feel that that the next general election you know, it's actually not, the next general election is not actually the first milestone. The next milestone will actually be next year's district council elections. So if we just for a second channel it into specific sort of electoral, you know, the electoral process, I do feel that there's a lot of potential there, and certainly by next May, when the next district council elections take place across the country, you know, Labour's position on a lot of things will be very clear. But by then, you see, we'll be 5 months into perhaps a no deal Brexit. You know, there'll be a lot happening, which provides an incredible thought and meat for discussion. And I think that and that will feed into voting patterns. And I think that we need to be ready for that. You know, we need as progressives to be in a position where we know what it is that we want to be saying and what we want to achieve. Now, not everybody who is involved in the pro-Europe movement broadly, you know, votes Labour. Fair enough, absolutely not. That's one of the beauties of it, and I loved it, being involved in the People's Vote campaign, because it was cross-party. It was a really fabulous experience to be working with people from other parties, you know, with this common goal. But I think that actually that remains a strength of the pro strands. I mean, I never thought I would one day be in a movement that was, you know, had as one of its heads Michael Heseltine. You know, I really never thought that I would, and still to this day I think of Michael Heseltine as the guy who, having, you know, sort of being under John Major, being the one who tried to shut down the pits that they hadn't managed to shut down in 1984. You know, and I feel, you know, I have an ambiguity towards him, even though we share the view with Europe. You know, but I think that the next general election, by then, you know, and I'm not dictating at all. Bath for Europe are fabulous. You're so active. You're a real inspiration to all of us. It's definitely an inspiration to Gloucestershire for Europe, you know, which is also incredibly active. But I think that all the pro-European groups, you know, to work out what is it that you know, is giving us the opportunity to change minds. You know, is it the personal sort of collapse of Boris Johnson's popularity, or, you know, is it you know, the evident massive incompetence of the government, its failure to do the one thing that all governments must do, which is protect their own people. A complete failure to do so. I mean, yeah, okay, you know, we could have had a higher death toll, but the fact is that, you know, it's because of people in the care homes looking after people. It's because of the NHS. Is it because of Matt Hancock? Is it because of, you know, these other characters in government that, you know, we haven't had a higher, you know, are they the ones who are essentially in the end responsible, you know, for the death toll being what it is rather than double? You know, it's an unknown. But I think the point is that you know, the next general election, or by the next general election, you know, we should be very clear about what progressive means, what European identity means, what it is that, you know, essentially will be, and this is a crucial thing that I think really will resonate with lots of people, what it is we need to do to ensure that the United Kingdom doesn't fall apart, because it's a very important issue. It's very potent, and it's one that you know, you know, it will resonate very strongly with people. You know, that I mean, even now, I mean, one's seen during the pandemic, essentially, you know, the 4 nations of the UK all going their own way. You know, I mean, it's an astonishing phenomenon that you know, that has been the case, that there has been such a, you know, divergence, and you know, and if one looks, you know, at the position, I mean, you know, Arlene Foster is more popular than Boris Johnson, and yet, you know, not long ago she was not by any means popular within Northern Ireland, because she was seen as having sold out in so many different ways. So I think that, you know, that there's a lot that we need to ensure that we don't let people, as it were, forget, and in fact we find a way of ensuring that they front of the political debate that we, you know, we will, that should be mounted over the next, you know, what, 11 months, 10 months between now and the district council elections, because I think that we can feed into people's minds, you know, this is a government that it's a one-trick pony, and that pony is now, you know, frankly, at the knacker's yard, and you know, that's how we play it.
So I guess one of the communication vehicles that is going to be part of the toolkit really is going to be these bylines, local papers, online papers. So what can we do to support you? How can we get more involved if possible? And also, how do we penetrate outside of the Remainer bubble, and how can we look into our language? Obviously, because if we're just talking to ourselves, surely we're going to just repeat the same messages that we are already familiar to us.
Sure.
So how do we burst out of this bubble, which has always been a bit of an issue for the Remain campaign?
Yeah, great. No, these such important issues, Emma. Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, several things. Really, forever breaking out of the bubble is absolutely crucial, which is why street stalls still remain a great thing, because one can approach people and one can finding that outreach, as it were, is vital, because without getting people who are not our supporters at least hearing us and engaging in dialogue, then we stand still. And I think that within the context of obviously of party politics, I mean, all the parties know that they can only win if they win over people who've previously voted for other parties, and it's the same. It's been the same for decades. And I mean, okay, so having been a candidate in the Cotswolds and having been a candidate in northeast Somerset, both extremely strong conservative seats, but it was always a great challenge, but also always a marvel, being in a position where you found yourself in conversation with those dyed-in-the-wool opponents of the Labour Party. Frankly, euphoria when, and there are particular occasions where, imagine Cirencester Market Square, it's not the most liberal of places, although of course there is a Lib Dem council now in the Cotswolds, but 2017, Cirencester Market Square, Saturday morning, finding yourself in conversation with a very sort of with very sort of conservative people, actually getting at the end of one conversation somebody saying, well, young man, I think I might give you a go this time. I think you've convinced me, and this is someone who's voted Tory since 1066. It's an extraordinary experience. It really is. It does happen, and discussion it can happen, and obviously we know it, but we mustn't be intimidated by the fact that we lost the referendum, we lost the opportunity, or we didn't have a second referendum. There are we've got a big mountain to climb, but I do feel that because the credibility of Johnson is a crucial part of the credibility of all these things that have happened, that that the combination of him sinking in the polls, or sinking in public opinion, but also the very fact, and we have to remind ourselves this, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm a Remainer, many of them, but one of them is because, the economic consequences I still believe will be dire, and they will be dire. I'm not, it wasn't just a ploy saying, oh, we'll all be poorer. We will all be poorer. Everything suggests it, and frankly, we already are, okay, because of perhaps the pandemic initially, but add to that Brexit, I mean, really terrible situation. So all these different things, I think, point to, finding of, of ensuring that the profile, is held high, that that there are still letters to the papers being written, that there are still all the different fora that one's used over the last 4 years have to still be used. They really do, because we've lost many battles. But I still don't believe we've lost all. And the reason why is because we are better within the European Union, no doubt, in my mind, but also our identity is European. Everything is, we're part of that, part of the political culture. And I think that what is also extremely important to keep in mind, is that, in the space of the last 4 years, so since the referendum, just go back to perhaps 2015, so the last 5 years, I mean, so much has changed in the world. We've had Putin manipulating elections. We've had, essentially, we've had China basically saying so many times, get off and stop criticizing us. We're going to do what we like. We are going to crush democracy in Hong Kong. We've had Trump as the most obscene figure ever to have occupied the White House, getting away with it in certain ways, but let's see what happens at the election later this year. So, an enormous amount has changed. in the last 5 years. And I think that what that's done, just again referring back to my original comment, that I think this is part of the experience that the world is having of this sort of, I mean, I don't really like the word populism, but let's use it anyway. And I think that that's this whole idea of take back control or make America great again or this, that, or the other, all these different things, the rise of white supremacists and the sort of all these different things that are going on, which were unimaginable 5 years ago. Frankly, I never expected to be in this place 5 years ago. It was just unimaginable that we'd be in this current situation. But I think that we're finding our way out of it. I think that the world is actually, I mean, I think Americans are sick of Trump. They realize what a grotesque character he is. I think that the capacity of democracies to resist the onslaught that Putin has got planned, particularly obviously in Western Europe, I think that is something that is being contended with in quite formidable ways. I think that the European Union will emerge from the pandemic stronger in the end, and obviously horrendous situations in Italy and Spain in particular. But I think that this is a right message, and I think that the institutions and the ideas that underpin the EU, international of a kind, will emerge actually stronger. And I think that, however, the experience of people, whether in the UK or elsewhere, it's crucial. It's crucial that people do experience these things, because we tried to argue these things and it didn't work. So now people have got to experience the downsides, see it for themselves, and then we've got to be there to say, yeah, and by the way, it doesn't have to be like this. We can actually do these things instead. So with regard then to how do we get the message out there, first of all, we play it very carefully, because we don't want to bang people over the head. We do want to be positive. We want to make it clear that we are British, British residents or British citizens. We're people who believe in these things, and these are the reasons why. And this is what it is and this is why it is that we can all be a part of a more tolerant society, underpinned by the rule of law and good government, and crucially good government, because now for the first time in the lives of many of the people of this country, we're seeing bad government. Really, really bad government. I mean, government of such a low caliber that can't protect us, that can't lead, that can't inspire confidence. And I think that that's a real eye-opener for a lot of people. So we have to be in a position, I think, where we are able to convey a sense of, it doesn't have to be like this. There are alternatives, and find the ways of doing it. Now, with regard then to the bylines, just as a little plug for bylines. And how can you help? And thank you very much for raising that, Emma. So there are now, as I said earlier, three bylines publications. So Yorkshire Bylines was the first. Northeast Bylines was launched on Friday. West England Bylines will be launched at the beginning of August, and so on. And then there will be others. And I'm the editor of West England Bylines. We're a very tiny team, but with lots of support, because of course, these publications have a lot of similarities, and the infrastructural support and the technical support is pooled. And so, we get lots of support from those who are in fact behind Yorkshire Bylines and so on. So there's it's a very, very good opportunity, I think, for progressive-minded people to contribute their ideas, their thoughts, their analyses, but also their news. Things that are going on. This is what we're doing here because this is why, and this is how our movement this is how Bath for Europe has decided it's going to do this, this, and this, because we feel very strongly that we've not lost the fight for progressive pro-European values. So it can be, as it were, thick issues, or it can be bigger analyses, or everything in between. I mean, I'm the editor. Perhaps Emma, if you could share my email with everybody, and then provide, and then send me your ideas, and I would love to hear from everybody. And I edit ruthlessly. I was just, my own background is journalism. I was the Guardian's Africa correspondent for 5 years, and I was the Financial Times Middle East correspondent, and then security correspondent for a good long period. So I was 22 years as a journalist for those two papers. And so, you know, I kind of, you know, your work would be in, you know, competent hands. But the aim being to provide, I think, people with, you know, with a first of all, writers with a platform for their views, but also for those people who want to see what is taking place in this world of progressive views and progressive ideas. They can come to the different bylines publications, and they can feel, you know, yeah, it's mine because I live in the west of England, or it's mine because I live in Yorkshire, which I think is great because it acknowledges the sort of regionalism of the UK, and also makes clear, yeah, and in each of these regions there are progressive people. So please do, you know, send me your ideas, and or even just send me an article and say, is this the kind of thing that you're interested in? I mean, that would be great. And I'm looking for copy at the moment, because you know, where we want to have about, I'd like to have sort of 15 or even 20 pieces, you know, in the cupboard, as it were, or in my drawer. So before we launch, so that there's a good flow, and we can really roll it out very effectively over you know, throughout sort of August, September. So please do let me know if you're able to.
Excellent. I've shared Mark's email in the chat, so if anyone wants to get involved, then please do. That would be great. I realise it's 3:10. I don't know. I can't remember if we said it would be an hour or an hour and a half, but I think there's still a couple of questions in the chat that we haven't touched on. So if people don't mind carrying on, hopefully, obviously, if you have other things to do and you want to leave, then we won't be offended at all. Something that came up that you were talking about a little earlier was Trump, and obviously the local elections in May of next year. Do you think that if President Trump was not re-elected, that would have an impact on the rise of populism, and whether by the time we got to the local elections in May, whether that would make a difference at all?
I think that it's an interesting. Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think that the, you know, what is the impact of Trump on the, you know, on the sort of on the mentality in the UK? I think it's quite complex, because I think on the one hand, you know, there is a sort of political affinity between, you know, the sort of Farage type UKIPers and Brexit Party types, and Trump. And obviously Farage has tried to promote it because it's been in his own interest to do so. And obviously he needs a job, doesn't he? Let's face it. So he's going to sort of find any way of making a bit of money, having lost his radio slot and not being an MEP anymore, and so on. So I think that Farage's role in suggesting that there is a kind of sort of osmotic relationship between what Trump is all about and sort of populism in the UK, or that sort of, you know, strand of political thinking or political activity, it's in his interest to do so. I do wonder how deep it is. You know, I mean, for example, among people I know, friends and others, you know, who are Brexiters, you know, they don't really talk about Trump, frankly. The name Trump doesn't come up very much with regard to, you know, how they see their own sort of political, you know, what's on their political horizon. Now, of course, you know, yeah, of course, there are some, when you've got a, you know, Make America Great Again flag being waved in Parliament Square during a you know, a sort of anti-Black Lives Matter campaign to save the statue of Winston Churchill, you think, my goodness, you know, there are people who are trying to bring together all these different things. And I feel that those people are challenged when it really comes to, you know, how they really bring those things together. Because, you know, essentially Trump, you know, is an American nationalist, and you know, that isn't in the interest of any country except the United States, and obviously it's not in the interest of millions of people in the United States either. But in terms of, you know, where we fit as the UK into, you know, American nationalism of the Trump kind, you know, there seems to me to be a contradiction, you know, because I don't feel that, you know, that Trump is out to assist any country in the world except the one that he currently leads. And let's hope he no longer leads it after November. So I think that it's the case that then, so with regard to the direct or indirect impact of you know, on UK electoral prospects of Trump losing, I think that there will be some impacts, because I think that if he loses, then the challenge for Johnson of getting, you know, one of these easiest deals in history of the kind that Liam Fox talked about with regard to trade, I think that will be a big challenge for him. I mean, I understate it. You know, I think frankly, the Democrats will say, you know, no, there's a queue and you're at the end of it, just as Barack Obama did. And I think that there will be quite a lot of politics in that. And I think, on the other hand, the Americans will also be saying, or that, you know, particularly if, you know, I mean, there's now a suggestion of the actual, you know, of Congress, you know, of Congress going Democrat. And obviously they've got the House, but now of the actual, you know, of the Senate becoming Democrat as well, which would be marvelous. You know, it really would, if Biden's able to win the presidency. And I think that those things, you know, will have an impact, you know, not on the thinking of the sort of, you know, the sort of the Brexiter across the country in the UK, but I think it will have a direct impact on Johnson's capacity to do two things. First of all, obviously, to secure a trade deal with the US in the shortest time possible, and all the other stuff that Trump's been coming out with. But also, I think it will really undermine the morale of the government, because I think that they will realise that the House of Cards, you know, is looking a bit shaky. Because you know, having allowed thousands of people to die during the pandemic, and having obviously, you know, whether it's Johnson Senior heading off to Greece, or Cummings heading off to Durham, and so on and so forth. I mean, those things have had a serious impact, particularly Cummings, you know, on attitudes, I think, across the UK. That those things, coupled with, you know, a sense of, you know, that the global populist picture is one that is, you know, is changing fast. I think will have an impact on Johnson, because he, first of all, won't get a quick deal, and that will make people again worry about, or think about, you know, who is this guy? We thought he could sort of walk on water, and he can't. And I think at the same time, it will be impossible for the government to then be able to pursue that sort of logic that they've obviously sought over some time, which is, well, you know, we kind of don't need the EU because we're going to have a deal with America instead. And of course, that will collapse as a sort of dichotomy. And I think that so that will have an impact. You know, and so yeah, there will be, I think, direct impacts, but I think we'll see them filtering into government policy, possibly more evidently than sort of within the context specifically of public opinion across the UK. Because I think, you know, public opinion is ambiguous about Trump. You know, I don't think that people voted it because the idea of, like, Trump, for example. I mean, you know, obviously it's a different sort of situation. Obviously he wasn't president then, but the attitude to Trump, I think, is a complex one. But as I say, nevertheless, I think that if he loses, there will be some very practical impacts, but mostly within the government itself.
Okay, thanks. I've just got another question that I'm sort of going to push together, and I think that will be the last one. So with regards to the Labour Party, you said their policy at the moment is really sort of wait and see. So obviously with the strong possibility of a no-deal Brexit at the end of this year, do you think that is about, like you were saying, people need to experience the consequences of a Brexit vote? And then secondly, what do you think it would take for the Labour Party to support rejoining the EU at a later date?
On the first question, yes, I mean, you know, one of the reasons why I've gone on perhaps too much about it, but, you know, I do feel it's an important point, that experiencing what it's like to be outside the EU, experiencing the impact of being a country essentially alone in the world, obviously trying to sort of revive, you know, sort of a romantic idea of empire and all the other stuff, using the Commonwealth as a sort of tool of some sort. I mean, all these different things, but experiencing essentially the truth and the reality of being, you know, a country on the edge of Europe, whose strength is so substantially rooted in being part of the European Union, or has been thus far, is something that you know, we tried as progressives, as Remainers, to convince people of. We failed in the end, and you know, so people need to feel it for themselves. They need to feel what it is, what it meant to have real-time supply chain for the car factory that you work in Luton or in Ellesmere Port or in Sunderland. They need to understand that we were not lying and that there was no such thing as Project Fear. And it's a real tragedy that that people couldn't see it for themselves, that they're going to have to find job losses and losing their homes and and essentially poverty, which will be obviously partly created by the COVID impact, but exacerbated massively by Brexit. And I think that so that the experience, I think, is going to be a crucial part of things, and that's why we have to be there with alternatives. With regard to Labour, I mean, I don't have any. I mean, I was part of Keir Starmer's campaign in the Southwest to have him elected as leader, and I worked hard on that. I think my sense from talking to people in his team and those in the Southwest who are very much up to speed on what's going on. There are several things, and I think that they are important. One is, clearly, Labour. Labour is still recovering from a disastrous election, and so that's something that has hit hard, to a lot of people. And so there's a lot going on within Labour that it has to be resolved, and in terms of partly mentally resolved, as well as in terms of administration and strategy and so on. And I think that there's a lot happening, but it's happening pretty fast. And obviously Keir has been pretty quick in terms of certain things needed to be done immediately, and they are. And he's got he's now got obviously a new General Secretary who is one of his own people, which is a big step. And I think that there's a lot happening which is very positive with regard to Labour's capacity to grapple with and contend with the issues that have faced it internally, but then to essentially strengthen itself so it can very assertively look outwards and confront the government and play that role of opposition. And I think that it's happening. It is working well. I think with regard to Europe, we're not going to see. I mean, as I said earlier, in fact, we were perhaps before we all began to chat, Emma and I were talking about this. That essentially, what Keir Starmer has said is very straightforward, which is Boris Johnson has said he'll get a great deal. Let's see. Now, it's the best way of going about it, because the only, and this goes back to this issue of experience, that so much of what was said by the Brexiters during the referendum campaign and up until last year was all about, in a sense, unprovable things. I mean, it's all rooted in sunny uplands and golden futures and all this other stuff. Yeah. Now the thing is that how do you disprove that there will be a golden future? How do you say no? Of course there won't be a golden future. You in the end you can't. You just have to argue it, and somebody believes you or they don't. So in the end, we're all left in the position, I think, where we will all do well to not wait and see, but keep a very, very close eye on the incremental steps that are being made between now and the end of the year, in order that that we can be very clear about, first of all, understanding precisely why it is that things are going in the direction that they're going in. I think that's very important. But then within the context of Labour, to work out at what point do we sort of enter the fray with regard to the issue. Now, I think it's going to be a while. It's going to be a good period of time, because obviously Keir Starmer's approach thus far, and it's been very effective, has been to ask questions. And by God, they've been good questions. I mean, they really have, and he's never lost his temper, and he's only ever done things which have shown Johnson to be the outrageous charlatan that he is, completely without knowledge, facts, depth, just utterly unfit for office. And Keir hasn't done that by saying you're unfit for office. He's let Johnson do it for himself. And I think that will be what we will continue, or he will continue in that way, and the Labour Party will continue in that way. Not self-indulgently, because of course we do we will have at certain point to be able to say, well, okay, and this is what we would do. This is how we will do it better. And that will happen. But I think with regard to Brexit, because it's such a potent issue, because it's such an emotive issue, because of the fact that as soon as you throw in various words, Brexit being one, Remainer being one, Leaver being another, people just, they either shut off or they feel they know those arguments already, which is why, as I said earlier, we've got to take the argument to the next stage. We've got to have a new narrative. And I think that we'll see that within the context of Labour. There will be a new narrative which will be about, may be discussed, with between Barnier and Frost. If there is a deal, then the economic consequences will be the focus, but it will be in the form of questions. It will be about, okay, so what are you going to do specifically with regard to the infrastructure at Dover if there is no deal? We only have X number of customs officials there. It is estimated by the different organisations representing the hauliers and so on and so forth that we need 16,000 more. Where are they going to come from, and how are they going to be paid for? That's how Keir Starmer is going to pursue it, and it's so effective because essentially it undermines the government bit by bit by bit by bit in the way that he's been doing it thus far. And then I think Labour will, of course, just finally on this, Labour will, of course, always be listening to the national mood. And I think that the national mood will be the thing that will then determine what we see with regard to the strategy for the May 2021 district council elections. Because I think by then, my sense, strong sense, from where I live near Stroud, is that by May 2021, this will be a government on its knees, absolutely on its knees. Economically, we'll be a country on our knees, but also in terms of credibility, I think that its capacity to demonstrate why it is that it should be in power will be very, very challenged. And I think that we'll see the result of that in the May 2021 elections. And obviously, and so Labour will be focusing very strongly on ensuring that we do obviously capitalise on what the government has done in the meantime.
Excellent. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. I think it's time to wrap up now, but that was a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. As I said, I've shared Mark's email in the chat, so if you do want to get involved in the bylines, please do. I'm sure Mark would be very grateful for any contribution.
Absolutely, yes. As many as you can.
So thank you for joining Bath for Europe. If you want a bit more information about us, we have a website, which is bathforeurope.com. We also have a Facebook page and a group. And we are also fully cross-party. So our next event, which is actually happening this Tuesday, we'll have Molly Scott-Cato will be joining us for an online talk about Brexit and the EU as well. So all the details are on our website if you want to join that as well. And we do these sort of informal chats every month. So it's the first Sunday of the month. So at the beginning of August, we'll be talking about the Twinning Association. So we'll have one of the representatives of the Bath Twinning Association be joining us and discussing how we can maybe get more involved with strengthening our links with Europe, even considering that Brexit has now happened, but Europe is still there and they're still our friends. We have some other speaker events coming up later in the year, but yes, if you check our website and our Facebook group, you'll be able to keep in touch with all of that information. So thank you very much again for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I hope that we see you again on another online event, and maybe one day in person again. That would be wonderful. But
okay,
thank you again, Mark. It was great to speak.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Bye.